Mail order bride got off at the wrong station. But a little girl said Papa God finally answered us. The station at Elmsridge was barely more than a wooden bench beside a dirt path. No signs, no crowd, just a rusted lamp hanging from a crooked pole and the sound of crickets filling the morning hush. The wind was cold and dry, sweeping across the wide plains that stretched as far as the eye could see. Dust moved in slow spirals near the rails, as if time itself hesitated here. The sun peeked over the distant hills, lighting up the fields like a secret finally spoken. Thomas stood beside his horse-drawn wagon, hat pulled low, hands buried in his coat pockets. He was not a man of many words. Not anymore. Not since Martha died. His beard had grown thick and greying, and his shoulders had the shape of someone used to carrying things too heavy for too long. He had brought his daughter with him, wrapped in a shawl too big for her little frame. Her name was Ellie, and she had not smiled in months. She held a small wooden doll carved by her father, worn smooth by grief and small fingers. They had come to meet someone, a woman, a mail-order bride. Letters had been exchanged, photos sent, promises written in careful ink. The woman was due to arrive on the 7:10 train from Morley Junction. Thomas wasn't sure he believed in love anymore. He only believed in giving his daughter something soft to hold on to. The train pulled in with a low groan, steel grinding on steel. A puff of smoke clouded the platform as the brakes hissed. Only 2 people stepped off, an old man with a violin case, and a woman in a pale green dress, looking around with confusion written all over her face. Her suitcase was small, her shoes were dusty, her eyes locked with Thomas's for only a second, and then she looked away. Thomas frowned. She was not the woman from the photograph, and yet his daughter tugged his coat and pointed with her tiny hand. "Papa," she whispered, her voice cracking through the silence. "God finally answered us." The woman stood still as the train pulled away behind her, leaving only a trail of dust and the quiet echo of metal fading into the morning. Her hands gripped the handle of her small suitcase like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. Her eyes scanned the empty station again and again, growing more uncertain with each passing second. She looked too young to carry that kind of sorrow in her face, and yet there it was, resting behind her silence like a stone in the chest. Thomas watched her closely, the way her breath shuddered in her throat, the way her lips moved but made no sound, as if she was counting the steps of a prayer she had forgotten how to finish. She looked lost. Not the kind of lost that comes from missing a train or a direction, but the kind that settles into your bones when you have nowhere left to go. Ellie had stepped forward slightly, her little boots crunching the gravel. She held on to her father's hand with one and the doll with the other. The girl stared at the woman the way children sometimes do, with no fear, no judgment, just wide-eyed curiosity and some deeper, older understanding. Thomas felt the familiar ache rise in his chest. It wasn't about the woman's mistake. It was about how quiet her pain looked. He had seen that same look once before in the mirror, months after Martha died, when he used to come back from the fields just to sit on the porch, watching the wind move the empty rocking chair she used to sit in. When Ellie used to cry for her mama in the middle of the night, and he didn't know whether to hold her or go outside and scream. He stepped forward a little, then stopped. This woman wasn't the one he had written letters to. She wasn't the plan. She might not even know where she was. Helping her meant inviting something unpredictable into his already fragile world. And yet, something in her silence spoke louder than any name written in ink. She hadn't said a word, but her eyes had asked something impossible, a plea without sound. Thomas looked down at Ellie. Her face was soft again. Not happy, but softer than before. There was light returning to her somehow. And maybe that was enough. He exhaled slowly and walked toward the woman. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't ask who she was. He just reached out and took the suitcase from her trembling hands. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice rough like dry bark. "Let's get you warm." She followed without a word. It was only on the 3rd evening, when the sky turned the color of faded blood and the wind howled louder than the coyotes, that Thomas began to notice the cracks in her silence. She had not spoken a single word since stepping off that train. She helped in the kitchen, gathered firewood, and braided Ellie's hair gently by the fire. But her eyes stayed far away, like they were still watching something from a different life. Something she hadn't outrun. Thomas didn't press her. He had learned long ago that pain came out on its own, not by force, but by time. Yet that night, as he lit the lantern and heard a distant noise outside the cabin, a strange echo that didn't belong to the woods, something in his gut twisted. Later, after Ellie had fallen asleep, he found the woman sitting alone on the back porch, arms wrapped tight around herself, rocking slowly. The stars were sharp and silent above. She spoke then, voice thin and careful, like a thread on the edge of breaking. "My name's Anna," she said, "and I wasn't supposed to be on that train." Thomas didn't move. He only listened. "I was supposed to go to St. Helena. I ran. The man they sold me to. He wasn't just cruel. He was known for what he did to girls, young girls. His sons were worse. I only had enough money for one ticket, so I got off early. I thought it would confuse them." She looked at him then, eyes glassy but defiant. "I didn't mean to end up here. I just needed to get anywhere they wouldn't look." Thomas swallowed hard. He felt the weight of her words land like stones in his chest. Not just a woman at the wrong stop, but a hunted one. "They'll come?" he asked. Anna nodded. "He owns half the land in St. Helena, pays sheriffs, buys silence. I took what wasn't mine, myself." The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Thomas looked through the dark window toward Ellie's small sleeping frame. Fear clawed at the back of his throat. Anna stood slowly. "I can go," she said, "before they reach this place. I won't bring that trouble to your door." But Thomas had already made his decision. He walked past her, bolted the front door, and checked the rifle above the mantel. Then he placed another log on the fire and spoke without turning around. "They've already found you, and now you're under my roof." And in that moment, the quiet cabin became a place of war. Days passed, and the silence between them changed its shape. It was no longer heavy with fear. It softened into something unspoken but understood, like the hush of snowfall at dawn. Anna still didn't speak much, but her hands began to move with purpose. She cleaned the cabin, mended Ellie's torn dress with tiny, perfect stitches, and carved a new handle for the kettle Thomas had given up on. She never asked. She just did, quietly claiming her place without claiming a voice. Thomas noticed how she rose before the sun, grinding coffee with slow, steady rhythm. She chopped wood with more grace than strength. One afternoon, he found her outside, teaching Ellie how to braid grass into rope. The little girl laughed, really laughed, and Thomas had to look away before the sound broke something soft inside his chest. That same evening, after supper, he brought down the old rifle from the mantel. It had belonged to his brother, the only man who had ever stood between Thomas and the worst of their father's anger. He handed it to Anna without a word. Her fingers trembled as she took it. He led her outside to the edge of the pasture, far from Ellie's ears. There, under the wide sky, he showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger slow. The first shot echoed through the valley like a warning to the world. They didn't speak much that night, but something had shifted. In the soft lantern light, Thomas took off his shirt to clean a deep scratch across his shoulder from the barbed wire fence. Anna saw the scars on his back. Faded, but still there, old wounds from childhood beatings. She didn't ask. She simply placed the rag in warm water and dabbed the blood away. Later, she let him see hers, a rough patch along her ribs, a thin white mark across her palm, one behind her ear. No stories, no explanations, just the quiet exchange of history carved into skin. That night, Ellie crawled into Anna's lap with her doll and fell asleep without fear. Thomas watched them from the chair, eyes heavy but heart awake. The wind outside had calmed. The fire crackled low. For the first time in a long while, the cabin did not feel like a house haunted by what was lost. It felt like something beginning, something whole. And outside, somewhere in the dark, the danger still moved. But for now, inside these walls, there was peace. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with dust. A dry wind picked up one morning, spinning circles across the field as the sky turned a shade paler than usual. Thomas had been repairing the barn gate when he saw the 3 riders at the ridge, dark silhouettes against the rising sun, unmoving, watching. He didn't go inside right away. He walked slowly to the porch, set his tools down, and took the rifle from behind the door. He glanced once at Anna, who stood frozen at the sink, her hands soaked in soap, knuckles white. Her face told him everything. She recognized them. Ellie stood near the fireplace, humming a quiet tune as she brushed her doll's hair. She didn't know yet. That was a mercy. By the time the riders reached the gate, Thomas stood alone, legs braced, rifle resting against his shoulder. The man in front wore a leather coat, dark and expensive, with a silver badge that didn't quite shine. His face was clean-shaven, but his eyes were dead. "We're looking for a woman," he said. "Name of Anna. Property of Mr. Dolman. Ran off with stolen goods." Thomas didn't blink. "Ain't no property here but land and animals. And I don't see any thieves." Another man spit into the dirt. The third laughed, a sound too sharp, too loud for the quiet field. "You'll want to think this through, friend," the leader said. "Harboring her means you answer for her. We got papers and paid law behind us." Thomas looked past them to the horizon. Nothing but fields and sky, no one coming, no help on the way. "She got off at the wrong station," he said, voice low. "But it was the right place." The man's face darkened. "Last chance. You move, or we take her by force." Inside, Anna stepped forward. Her hands shook, but she carried Ellie in her arms. Her lips trembled as if she was about to offer herself up. Thomas caught her eyes and gave a small shake of his head. Then he raised the rifle. "You'll cross that line," he said, "only if you plan to die on this land." A long silence followed. Tension stretched thin like a wire ready to snap. Then a shout came from behind the riders. Another horseman. A woman in government blue, dust on her coat, a file in her satchel. She held up a paper and called out, "Federal override. Dolman's property claim revoked. Anna's name cleared. He's under investigation." The riders froze. One cursed. One turned his horse. The leader stared at Thomas, long and bitter, before backing away. They left, without another word. Thomas exhaled like he hadn't in years, and in the doorway behind him, Anna sank to her knees, still holding Ellie. Both safe, both finally free. The riders vanished over the ridge, swallowed by dust and distance, but the silence they left behind stayed, thick as fog. No one spoke. Even the wind had paused, as if unsure what Tsartin came next. The cabin stood still in the golden light, as though holding its breath along with them. Thomas lowered the rifle slowly, his hands steady but his heart hammering like hoofbeats in his chest. The woman on horseback, the federal investigator, handed over the papers without ceremony. Her words were few. The Dolman family had been under quiet scrutiny for months. Anna's testimony had been the missing piece. And now it was over. She would not be taken. Not now. Not ever again. She turned and left, just as quickly as she had come. No thanks were needed. Some people, like her, came only to end storms. Thomas walked back to the porch where Anna still knelt, her arms wrapped around Ellie. The girl's head rested on Anna's shoulder, eyes closed, but calm. Her breathing was slow. She hadn't cried. Not once. As if even she knew that the danger had passed and that peace had finally found them. Fragile, but real. He reached down, helped Anna to her feet. She didn't let go of Ellie. She stood holding her like a mother holds more than a child. She held safety, warmth, and the last piece of herself she hadn't dared give to the world. Thomas opened the cabin door and stepped aside. Anna hesitated, just for a moment. Then she walked in. The fire had burned low, glowing embers now instead of flames. The house smelled of old wood and soup. It was nothing grand, but to the right person, it was everything. He set the rifle back on the wall, then removed his coat and hung it beside the door. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Anna placed Ellie down gently on the bed, tucked the blanket around her, and stood beside her in silence. Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. Her fingers brushed his. For the first time, her eyes met his and did not look away. Outside, the sky had turned from orange to deep indigo. A single star blinked into view. They sat near the hearth, close but not touching, 2 people who had been broken and still chose to stay. The clock ticked softly in the background. Somewhere, an owl called. Nothing was said, yet everything had changed. Spring came slow to Elmsridge. The land thawed in quiet stages, frost melting from the barn roof, grass returning in faint green threads, birds nesting beneath the eaves. Life did not rush. It returned, as if on tiptoe. Anna planted flowers beside the porch. Nothing fancy, just wild roses and cornflowers gathered from the edge of the field. Ellie helped her, digging with a wooden spoon. Each bloom stood like a promise in the dirt, something alive where something broken once stood. Thomas repaired the back fence, replaced the leaking roof panel, and built a small wooden swing under the cottonwood tree. At night he still sat by the fire, but no longer alone. Anna sat near him, knitting quietly. Ellie curled up on the rug with her doll and a worn book. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was warm now, like a blanket shared. No one spoke of the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it had finally loosened its grip. The fear that once haunted Anna's steps had faded into watchful caution. And in that space, something else had taken root. Not love declared, but love proven, in gestures, in presence, in staying. On the wall beside the hearth, a new carving appeared, a small etching in the wood, 3 initials side by side, inside a rough circle. No one admitted to carving it. No one needed to. One morning, long after the threat had passed and the world had turned green again, Ellie came running into the cabin with a drawing in her hand. Crude, but clear. It showed a house, a woman, a man, and a girl holding hands. She didn't say a word. She simply hung it beside the fireplace, then leaned into Anna's arms. Thomas stood in the doorway and watched. The 2 of them. His eyes softened. His shoulders, once always braced for impact, had begun to settle. Outside, the wind moved gently through the wildflowers. And inside that little house at the